Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Skill Crane and, oh dear, Good Neighbors. Well, if it ain't the first truly infamous episode of the show. How exciting! Sorry, Skill Crane, but you've already been overshadowed and the review hasn't even begun yet. But don't worry, I'll be sure to give you my utmost attention in just a minute. But before I do that, let me just do my usual fare of saying thank you to everyone watching today. I feel like today it's especially relevant because it means you guys care enough to see me review a very controversial episode. Makes me feel like my opinion is important. Alright, time to stop stalling. Let's just get right into it. Starting off this review today is Skill Crane, which... Okay, you guys remember how I said at the end of my review of The Lost Mattress and Crabs vs. Plankton that the amazing tier streak Season 4 has going for it will be ending very soon? Well, obviously, it didn't end with the previous episode, so I think we all know what that means. Sorry to be spoiling, except for the part where I'm not, but hey, that only tells you that I don't see this episode as worthy of my amazing tier. Doesn't mean it's a bad episode. Let's discuss. I like the beginning of Skill Crane. I like how Mr. Krabs' hilarious reaction to the man in the suit confirms that he's a tax evader. Jokes that casually show that Mr. Krabs is a financial criminal are my favorites, usually because they're quick little throwaway things. For whatever reason, throwaway lines can be funnier than the jokes, given more attention. Anyway, the idea of bringing in a claw machine to the Krusty Krab is a pretty genius money-making scheme, I've gotta say. Seeing the claw machine in the Krusty Krab reminds me of going to Steak and Shake. They always have those machines. Do they still have them now? I haven't been to one of those in a while. Anyway, I love how Squidward tries to act all unbothered about the machine, but the second he plays it, he essentially winds up with a gambling addiction. Happens to the best of us, Squiddy. And this is a typical plot for Squidward, him quickly getting obsessed with something he deems below him. Happened in Just One Bite, happened in Employee of the Month, and now it's happening here. I also like how it's pretty clear that Mr. Krabs was low-key banking on Squidward getting addicted, since he's all like, my work here is done, when Squidward starts getting real excited about the machine. Perhaps he wasn't looking for Squidward to become obsessed, he just needed someone to. Either way, the machine is paying for itself, and that's all Mr. Krabs cares about. Which, actually, while I'm here for a second, let me just get ahead of the curve and say that I can very easily see how people might argue that this is an example of Mr. Krabs being a horrible person and boss and yada yada yada, flanderization, this and that, and all I gotta say is, I think Mr. Krabs in this episode is acting very typical of himself. Did we not just cover Krabbyland less than a month ago? And also, I think we all seem to lose sight of the fact that within the show there aren't really consequences for things. Like, Mr. Krabs taking all of Squidward's money and the deed to his house is not this horrible thing that's a death sentence like it would be in our world now. I just think some people take this show too seriously, especially the people who love throwing around that nonsense Squidward torture porn classification. But I'll be talking about that more at another time. The point is that I like Mr. Krabs in this episode, and I don't think he's any better or worse than usual. Turning my attention elsewhere, I've got to say that SpongeBob is cute in this episode, especially when he wins Barry. I find it pretty funny how much more luck SpongeBob has with the machine than Squidward, and because he's SpongeBob, he doesn't rub it in Squidward's face. Unless he is, very subtly, but I doubt it. I like when SpongeBob is a little shit, but it only works when he's being competitive with someone or if he's being Troll Bob, so him just being a ball of sunshine here works perfectly fine for me. Squidward manages to break out of the crane's trance, at least for a little bit. One little bit that I liked in this episode was the crane's squeaking sound turning into Squidward's name. It's just a great way of getting the story across, showing how much Squidward wants to play that crane. And then I love how Mr. Krabs is completely shameless, continually asking if Squidward needs some change. And then the way Squidward eventually loses it and yells at Mr. Krabs is pretty funny. I can see why it was turned into a meme. I also think it's funny how the luck difference between SpongeBob and Squidward is exaggerated to the point where Squidward is prizeless 6 hours later, while SpongeBob wins so much he literally puts a toy back into the machine. Another thing I like in this episode is Squidward's spiral, which I kind of mentioned earlier. He can't stop thinking of the crane at all, and even SpongeBob has to be like, I think you have a problem. Of course, Mr. Krabs doesn't care, not even batting an eye when Squidward hands over the deed to his house. Maybe one of the reasons Mr. Krabs does not bother me one iota in this episode is because, more than anything, he's just a plot device here. He's there to tempt Squidward. That's it. Anyway, I thought it was nice of SpongeBob to teach Squidward how to win at the crane. Reminds me of Bubble Stand. And finally, Squidward wins, to the satisfaction of everybody, which which makes me think of Big Pink Loser when Patrick opens the jar. But of course, we have to remember that Squidward is not SpongeBob. He's a sore winner. The part with the kid is equally horrible and hilarious, and I also like that SpongeBob legitimately gets annoyed with Squidward's behavior after he wins. Shows that the sponge has a backbone. Another complaint about the episodes after the first movie that I don't completely agree with. And in the last part of the episode, it's pretty funny, with Squidward taking things way too far by using a real crane. I think that SpongeBob's reaction here, like him trying to stop Squidward and all that, is funny, and then the construction workers were a great addition as well. The pure chaos of this last scene is exactly the type of chaotic SpongeBob SquarePants ending that I love to see. Though, I guess at this point, these chaos endings weren't strongly associated with the show, since they didn't really start getting used until this season. Just know that I love chaos. And then Mr. Krabs also gets what's coming to him too, with the Krusty Krab being destroyed, as he should. And then we get one last gag with SpongeBob trying to save Squidward, but only picking up a toy, which was a great stinger to end this episode on. So, I quite like Skill Crane, and as you can see, I was singing its praises all day long. So why isn't it in my amazing tier? Well, it's because although I do enjoy this episode, the humor isn't all there for me. I know I point out the comedy quite a few times, but that's just my style of doing things. This episode had great jokes, but not everything worked for me, so I'd say this episode is generally decently funny. And also, this episode just lacks that wow factor I need for episodes to be in my amazing tier. That's why, instead, this episode is going into my great tier, where it comes in with a score of 8.7 out of 10. Well then, for our second episode of today's review, I'm covering Good Neighbors. This episode doesn't need a preamble, but I'll of course give it anyway. Good Neighbors is without question one of the most infamous SpongeBob SquarePants episodes of all time. With this episode being a subject of ire and derision from all parts of the fandom, it has been frequently regarded to be the beginning of the end for SpongeBob SquarePants. I, of course, have many thoughts about that. Primarily that I disagree with the statement in just about every possible way, and y'all should already know this. See, to say that this episode is the beginning of the end necessarily requires that you subscribe to the notion that modern SpongeBob is bad, and as we all know by now, I'm modern SpongeBob's defense lawyer. I may not be its biggest defender, as I can only call myself so many things without becoming egregious, but I am a big defender of it. None of this makes Good Neighbors inherently good, though. But it also doesn't mean that I dislike it. In fact, I haven't said anything about my opinion on this episode as of yet, just that I don't think it's the beginning of the end because there is no end. Also, you can't pinpoint any change in the show to a single episode, and I stand by that. So, what do I actually think of this episode? Well, for one thing, I think this episode is way, way too hated on. And most of that is because of this beginning of the end notion, not so much the actual content of the episode itself. And you can see that in the way that people talk about this episode. Even the review of the episode with the famous security system line does this. And so that's why in this review, I'm going to do my best to avoid doing this, though I may have to bring up that larger context again. But how about I just talk about Good Neighbors first? So, to start off, this episode is all about the neighborly relationship between SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick. For an episode topic, that's pretty neutral. In fact, it's to be expected considering these guys are the show's golden trio. And the beginning of the episode is pretty nice, and these first few moments make it clear why this episode is called Good Neighbors, with SpongeBob breaking into Squidward's house just to make sure he's up for work. And you know, while I'm here, I've heard many a complaint about how creepy SpongeBob is in these middle-aged SpongeBob episodes. I don't really subscribe to those complaints, mostly because I think SpongeBob breaking personal boundaries like this is funny, which, guess what, is the reason why the writers wrote him like this. Now, I'm a big believer in people being able to freely express that sometimes jokes don't work for them, so I've got nothing against anyone who doesn't find SpongeBob's behavior funny, but I just think a good chunk of the people making this complaint take this stuff too seriously. Just wait till we get to boating buddies. But anyway, we Ben knew that SpongeBob is a bit of a weirdo. Riverdale reference unintentional. And so the way he acts in this episode feels perfectly in character to me. Other than a few good jokes, like Squidward wanting to be president of Bikini Bottom, the next few minutes of Good Neighbors are kinda dull. That is, of course, not the worst crime an episode can commit, so considering the bad press surrounding this episode, I'll take that. However, I can't take it for long because things start taking a downward turn when SpongeBob acts really stupid out of nowhere, not knowing where Squidward is, and then Squidward's peaceful Sunday starts to get truly ruined when he doesn't even get his pedicure. Considering that Squidward hasn't done much at this point to deserve this treatment, and the way it's executed isn't all that funny, this isn't very satisfying. Actually, it's the opposite. It's a little frustrating. I only like seeing Squidward lose when it's funny and or a case of universal justice. Here, it is neither, which is a problem. Good Neighbors is yet another one of those episodes with two distinct parts, except the pacing of this episode is kinda weird. If the security system thing is a result of Squidward being completely done with SpongeBob and Patrick and the beginning of the real plot of the episode, then Squidward installing it should have happened much earlier. Because it happens this late in the episode, things feel a little rushed, but it's not too distracting. And also, this episode reminds me of that regular show episode Peeps. In this case, Squidward is in Benson's place, but the pacing is a little faster here than that episode because Squidward's plan backfires on him basically immediately. And speaking of Squidward's plan backfiring, I gotta be honest with y'all. The existence of the security system meme has made this scene a whole lot funnier to me. I can't even look at the scene objectively, whatever that even means, because this is a review, which means I'm being subjective by definition. Like, yeah, it's not really because of the episode's efforts that I find this scene funny, but the fact is I find this scene funny, so that's a point in this episode's favor. Squidward running around panicking makes me laugh for no reason, and then when he gets thrown out and pulls a Mrs. Puffin doing time, man oh man, I think this shit is hilarious. And it's also satisfying because Squidward can finally relax. Tuning into SpongeBob and Patrick's run of things, the house attacking the city is like, okay, whatever. This is where I wish the episode's pacing was different. If this scene had come earlier, then we could have had more time with SpongeBob and Patrick actually being funny while trapped in Squidward's house, and more time with Squidward actually enjoying his Sunday, and perhaps doing something to deserve his ultimate ending. I think the episode would have been better off if it had done these two things. As it is, the security system issue is resolved rather quickly, so we don't really get that much satisfaction in seeing Squidward enjoy his Sunday before he ends up having to do community service every Sunday for the rest of his life. At least SpongeBob and Patrick are forced to as well, though that's not great for poor Squidward. And it's a poor note to end the episode on. And I think that this is probably the biggest weakness of Good Neighbors. It just ends badly. The rest of it is not the show's best material, let me be clear on that. The pacing isn't great, and the episode is not all that funny, except for a few good moments, but as I've said before, I can forgive a lot if the ending of an episode is decent, as you might remember in my review of Dumped. Frankly, if the episode had gone the opposite direction than I had suggested earlier, and ended with Squidward's house destroying Bikini Bottom while Squidward relaxed, I think I would have liked the episode more. Anything to avoid this unsatisfying ending, to be honest. And so, it's this bad ending, more than anything else about the episode, that bogs Good Neighbors down for me. It's what sends it careening down my tiers, going down from that okay tier quality it was in general, past mediocre, to its final resting place just on the cusp of barely tolerable, where it comes in with a score 4 out of 10. Yeah, it's true. I don't dislike this episode all that much. It's not one that I rewatch, but I don't think it deserves to go in my bad tier either. There aren't many episodes that do. And there's even less that deserve abysmal status, which is, I'm sure, what some watching might consider this episode to be. However, this 4 out of 10 score does mean that this episode has been granted the lowest rating of the show thus far, so don't think I'm letting this infamous one off easy. I'm generous, not a fool. As always, gotta end this video with some closing thoughts of mine. Well, I'm interested. Was that score higher or lower than you all expected? I haven't reviewed very many episodes that I dislike, so I wonder if it's harder to predict when I might dislike an episode. I don't think it is, but obviously I'm me, so I can't really look at that from an outside perspective. But worry not, we will be getting to duds at least eventually. I won't say if there are many or any others in Season 4, because I like keeping some element of surprise, but one day we will eventually cover my least favorite episodes of the show, and then I can truly go in. Something I find funny about Good Neighbors is how much it reminds me of another episode with a pretty bad reception, Cephalopod Lodge. There's a few similar plot elements between the two episodes. Maybe that's why people don't like that one. I was also doing some musing about the old narratives surrounding this show. While Season 1 through 3 Dick Riders still exist, I think in general Season 4 has been seen in a more positive light as of late. I wonder if that means that Good Neighbors has found itself more and more in the clear. I don't really see people talk about this episode that much anymore, other than the security system meme. Honestly, I think that meme also helped a lot of people realize how ridiculous some reviewers sounded when reviewing middle-aged SpongeBob episodes, which reduced their credibility and helped shine more positivity on episodes of this era. But that's my own personal theory, not anything I can really back up. I think another reason that people aren't really trashing middle-aged SpongeBob as much anymore is because they're too busy trashing what is now modern SpongeBob. But even then, that's not an apt description when the first post-sequel episodes are almost 10 years old now. So I'll just say post-sequel and post-third movie episodes since I haven't named those eras yet. Okay, that's enough out of me. I'm gonna end the video now, and I'll see y'all in the next review.